Yes, we have a go live option now and we'll go live.
I can see it live. All right, awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Founders Unfiltered. We are really happy today because one, we have a returning AUP founder, and two, she's a woman founder. And three, we are back in the new year. So happy new year. We really hope everyone's staying a little safe. We know the thing that we should not be talking about is spreading like a lot. But we're really happy to have back with us Sumit and Govind from Fair Angels. We're also very happy to have Kritika today, who's from Looppanel, the company that we've had the absolute pleasure of doing an alpha users program back in August. In this session today, you will be able to understand how Looppanel came to be, how Kritika, one of the co-founders of the company, figured her journey towards it, the kind of amazing problems that she had to deal with and overcome through this company's creation process, and how she visualizes or sees the company grow in future. We also know from very secret sources that there is a SICOA interest. So I'm going to let Kritika take that one up. But before I do that, I would like to welcome back Govind and Sumit from Fair Angels. For anyone who's watching this, who is a new founder or a founder who's not had success, please do get in touch with Fair Angels. They really back a lot of passionate founders, and they'll be glad to have a discussion with you. And now that I have intentionally put a few more calendar requests to them, I will give it back to Kritika. Kritika, welcome back. Welcome back because you've been here before as an AUP founder. We're very happy to have you back. Thanks a lot for joining us. Please let us know what Looppanel is about.
Awesome. No, thank you so much, Shruti, and really excited to be here. I was also really enjoyed my experience with AUP and so excited to always collaborate with the team and creators of products. So really excited to chat with everyone today. And I know you already asked my first question, so I'll get cracking on that. And actually, before I even answer what we do at Loop, I thought I'd give a little bit of context around how we even came up on the problem. Since this is a founder focused session, I thought it might be interesting to folks, and why we felt it was something that really needed to be solved. And for that, I'll actually go back to my previous startup that I used to work at called Atlin. So Akash, my co-founder, and I used to be at Atlin, which is a data startup. And we were there in the early days when the business was actually at a very critical juncture. So Atlin, if for those who don't know, actually came from a different social enterprise called Social Cops. So we were there when the team was pivoting and we were moving from this really successful enterprise company that had, served the UN, the government of India, the PMO, to Atlin, which was this all new enterprise data startup selling into global markets. And we had some really big questions that our small team had to answer. It was, what are we even building? Who is it for? How in the world are we going to sell it to them? And so you can imagine the pressure and the focus that was on that small team to really crack a lot of these questions. And if for a lot of founders that may feel familiar, because even in the early days, that's what we had to go through with Loop. And of course, not only are your failure rates of startups really high, but it's actually compounded by the fact that 80% of the time, product teams are shipping features users do not want and rarely use. Now, Prakalpa and Varun, the founders of Atlin, were second-time founders. So they knew that, that this is a very high risk, and the ways to maximize the odds of success to actually be super close to users. So at Atlin, we would spend months talking to hundreds of potential users, figuring out, everything from their workflows to what are your tool sets, what gets you fired, what gets you promoted, mapping out all these needs. And at the end of each of those cycles of research, we would actually be left with a ton, like this enormous pile of data. Which sounds like a good thing, right? That sounds like, great, you have a lot of information, but it was actually extraordinarily painful because all of this information was trapped. It was trapped in Zoom recordings, transcripts, notes, scattered all over the company and the tool set. And so there was really no way, like when we had questions about what is the biggest need our users have, what tools do they use currently, how should we prioritize integrations, there was no good way to actually go to that data and say, okay, here's the answer. And so the way that we solved that problem in the early days of Atlan was actually very, very manual and very painful. So I would spend time in these crazy Excel spreadsheets, manually cataloging how every user had answered these questions, just trying to get to that clear insight. Wow. Of course, very painful for me. I obviously have some trauma with this experience, but also very painful for anyone else to consume. So, somehow that bullet point of me saying users struggled with data import, just not as impactful as seeing the user like rage click at your screen. And so that's actually why we're building Loop. And that's how we discovered this problem set, was that, we want to enable product and design teams to maximize their odds of success when they're building a product and actually build products that users actually love. And the way we do that is by streamlining the user research workflow, which is this incredibly messy, painful, time-consuming process, and help you get from conversations to actionable, shareable insights very easily. And so tactically, we bring all your user call data to one place, recordings, notes, transcripts, but we actually build on top of that. We build the ability to extract and act on that data. So, categorize every time a pain point came up, every time a competitor was mentioned. So now you can store, but you can also discover user insights and share those with a single click. You can create a 30-second video clip of user rage clicking and struggling. And it actually helps build that empathy and intuition across your team. So you're able to build that alignment across the right product decisions to make. So that was a little long-winded, but hope that answered your question.
Yeah. So for a layman, this wouldn't be a closed captioning application. This would be an insight driving from a closed captioning. So do we use it along a meeting happening, or do we use it after the meeting has happened? Like, how do we go about it?
That's a good question. So we're actually releasing a feature. That's what I was kind of getting at before when we chatted, within the next 2 weeks, where you're actually able to, during the conversation itself, start capturing those insights. So for example, you're listening to this podcast and you're saying, oh my God, that's a really cool, insight that I want to use because I'm struggling with the same issue. You can actually bookmark those key moments, write those notes in, and that gets tied to your data after the fact as well. So during the call, as well as after the call, we bring all your, conversation data to one place and help you actually act on it.
Awesome. Awesome. Go in, your turn.
Sure. Thanks, Shruti. So, Kritika, just to understand more about the product. So, the most basic element, it's a simple minuting product. You're saying as the model starts learning, you can focus on specific questions, take out that data, and once you take out the data, you can organize it better. Is that somewhat what the workflow is?
Yeah, I think that's a good way, in a layman sort of way to describe it. Basically, yes, we bring all your call notes to one place. And like you said, we can actually help you say, okay, these were the pain points, these were the issues that came up over and over, and then give you a view where across calls, you can say, okay, when I look at, my customers, everyone is complaining about X feature, or this feature request has come up so many times. When you think about your competitors, this is what users love about them or hate about them, and how can I use that to inform my strategy or my positioning?
So suppose someone's launching a D2C brand and running 5-minute video calls with potential customers. What do you like? What's your pain point? And who's our number one competitor? All those 3 questions from video calls can eventually turn into a dashboard where those 3 questions are summarized, basically.
Exactly. And so you're able to say, okay, what are those likes? You can tie it back to the original source also, right? So you have that summary of, okay, these are the things people are saying. Can I go back and see what was verbatim said in the call? What was shared on the screen? Maybe if you're looking at, prototypes, and product calls often have that. And so you're actually able to go back to that source of truth at any point. But of course, you have your summary in one place.
No, that sounds extremely interesting and useful. I mean, me just looking at, you just mentioned one use case, I can see 10, but tell me, how did it evolve? I mean, what was your first pain point when you found it? Was it just note recording, and how did it keep evolving?
Yeah, it was actually interesting because, I'll take you back to the beginning days of even Loop before the product existed. Now, we really believe in testing and understanding users to check our assumptions before we build anything. So Akash and I actually spent like a good month and a half being like, okay, let's talk to other people to see if others have the same issue. And again, this was pre-Loop, so I was taking all my notes and trying to organize them in an Excel. And really two things were happening, right? Number one, it was really hard for me to actually make sense of that. So I was like, okay, like how do I take these notes? How do I organize it in this really painful giant Excel? Horribly painful to actually organize, and would take me days to actually generate that. But now Akash was maybe not on all my calls. He's, the technical lead. He's like building stuff out. He's building our MVP. And he'd say, okay, I don't understand what you mean by this. Or like, what does this point really mean? There was actually a lack of, and this I think is actually one of the core issues, right? There was a lack of intuition in our ability to stay aligned, because he wasn't in all those calls, and everyone in your company is not always going to be in every single user call. So how do you make it so you can still be aligned on those user needs and insights? Even if it's a piece of text today in an Excel, how do you convert that to a way that people can actually get that empathy and that understanding in a more deep sense?
Awesome. So basically, if I were to take a call exclusively, knowing that someone else later needs to be reviewing it, I don't actually have to go through the entire recording. This would help me. So this would be like a good use case. Now, since I will come from a position of having actually seen the early access 6 months ago, from what I remember at that point, there were a lot of color coordinated and a few color marked emotions, and I call them emotions. You call them, I think you call them mood specific questions and answers. So was that like an insight that you found during research, that if I do this, then this is how it will reflect? Like, because transcripts is something almost every, whether it be Teams or whether it be Google, all of them provide. But that one thing that sets Loop apart is the fact that there is a emotion attached to it, and there's a highlighting of that emotion. So is that something you discovered, or is that something that just that was like a personal thing that I face it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So things do sometimes start with your own intuition, right? Like, and so if you're close to the problem, that does help. And so one of the ways that we actually started this was saying, okay, I can have a transcription tool, but honestly, it's so painful to read transcripts. My brain would like explode. And so Akash and I talked about that a lot. And we went out again and checked that assumption. Is this something that only Kritika faces, or is this something that in the broader universe, people generally don't want to spend a ton of time rereading transcripts, rewatching videos? We actually got like the validation for that to say that, yeah, a lot of other people face this issue. And so we wanted to say, okay, we don't just want to give you all the data in one place that does exist in other tools today, but how do we make it super easy for you to, again, like extract and act on that data? And there is actually where we did a bunch of experiments. So we tried many different forms with our early access customers, internally as well, testing on each other and saying, okay, what are the different ways we can make it almost like automatically bookmark key moments, insights, themes. So it's much easier for you to say, okay, these were the key things that I want to extract or find in this call. And one of the experiments we did internally and then tested with our users was what actually ended up as what we call the smart view, where we automatically detect all the questions across your conversation and all the emotional reactions of your users. And it was really like, we know that in these conversations, you're typically trying to answer a set of questions. So those are your topics and themes. And you care about your emotional reactions of your users because that's what you're solving for. Where were they incredibly frustrated? Where were they delighted by something? And you want to make sure that those are moments where you go, aha, and like, let me make sure that that's cataloged for future use or to find this pattern. And so that's actually where that came from. So it came from intuition, testing the assumption, and then experimentation.
Awesome. And we're only looking at a customer interview right now. But from what I understand, can I use this on an already existing YouTube link, or on a Spotify podcast, or on an Audible book? Or can I use it other than a call or an interview that I would do with my customer, because and so I backlog a lot of podcasts thinking I'll go back to it. I never go back to it. Can I run them through Loop and then just extract the important bits?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, technically what we built as a technology stack can be used for use cases like that. And we have seen some folks actually naturally pivot to those where they're like, okay, this is a ton of data that I don't know. I don't want to spend a ton of time consuming. How do I make it really easy? And they turn to Loop for that. Of course, we are focused on the product and design use case. So that's what we'll continue to iterate towards. But, we don't stop anyone from using Loop in other ways, like the use case that you mentioned. There definitely are more applications. But the starting point for us and the focus for us so far has been iterating for the product and design team in particular.
So you basically thought of a MVP and now you're chasing that so that you don't digress from what you initially wanted the solution to be.
Yeah. So again, Akash and I have always been very focused on assumption testing, on focused building, and all of that. And so the way that we actually built Loop, and just to give context on, why is this what we are actually doing? We actually explored a couple of ideas before this as well to say what are related concepts and issues. And we went out and did our research. A lot of the assumptions failed. We kept going until we discovered something. We were like, okay, other people have this issue. And then we actually did a landing page test where we were like, okay, let's put out just one page of a website on closed product and design communities. Let's see what's the reaction we get. And we saw so many people signing up for early access for Loop that it was great validation. We had folks happily paying for the product as we were even building out the MVP. And so it became a really good, strong signal for us to say, yes, this is a problem that exists. We found an audience that cares about it a lot. And they're actually coming to us and they're saying, here's money, solve it for me. And so that's actually why we want to stay now very focused on solving for that use case, because of course, the startup has very limited resources. And so focus on that. But of course, if it's valuable to others, we don't stop anyone.
So as a product getting used, you sort of struck gold with people actually liking it and wanting to pay for it even before you did your MVP out. Yeah. But other than that, there would still be a few things that you would end up struggling with as a new set of founders. Can you explore a bit on what you thought would be your struggle in either product building or company building?
I mean, that's a great question. I think there are always challenges with being a founder, right? So it's where do I begin? But I think the magic of being a founder is that there's also so many challenges. And in some ways, it is an uphill battle, but it's also, I guess maybe depends on your personality. I enjoy having challenges. I get bored if I don't. And so in some ways, sometimes it pushes you a little bit to the limit, but it is really exciting because you always have a new question or, issue or challenge that you've never faced before. And you're basically tasked with go figure it out and, use whatever resources you have at your disposal to do that. So, I mean, I know I mentioned that we tested our assumptions with Loop, we ran the landing page, and of course, there was great validation. But we had tested ideas before that as well. And those we did not get as good feedback for. And we did not feel like when we spoke to users, this was a real pain point. It was just something that maybe we felt more than others, or maybe the market's not mature enough yet to need that, clearly. And so that definitely does happen. And so I want to be clear, it's not like, there are some cases I know Segment put out something and it blew up and all of that happens. But even those guys struggled for a solid 4 years before they hit gold. And so I think that and so for us, it was more we don't want to spend 4 years on the wrong problem. We want to know quickly, right? And so we would do those rapid cycles of iteration. I think that was number one challenge. But from there, of course, everything it becomes its own. So you want to go through fundraising cycles, you want to hire a core team, you want to actually, of course, enable the product, stay super focused. You want to get those early customers and you're I'm just putting something together. How do I even convince people that this is something that they should be buying? Or, like, I know there's a lot that needs to still be built out and all of those in the early days. And so, of course, there's a series of challenges, but I think right at the top was even focus on something that we know there's need for. And that itself was like, we went through cycles to get there.
Awesome. So does Fair Angels have a question?
So, Kritika, just taking one step back for the larger audience, say you had a successful corporate, semi-corporate startup, whatever you call it, job in the US. I mean, how do you decide to quit? Was it that you had the idea? Was it that you got bored? Was it that you just decided, no, this is the time, it's not? I mean, how do you decide to quit? And see, risk is relative, income level is relative, but everyone faces that challenge, right?
Yeah.
How do you leave fixed income and go to founder status?
No, that is a very good question. Actually, I think for me, it has been a step-by-step journey across my career. So I have been taking what would maybe be called high risk and like not traditional choices, I will say. So to your point, Govind, I actually started my career as a strategy consultant. So I was working at a company called Parthenon EY. And so this is, working with private equity funds, with one of the biggest, beauty companies in the globe, actually, and working on really important big projects with them, getting paid very well. I was actually living in New York and then Singapore. And so to your point, I could have very much been like, I'll continue to do this and have a nice life and all of that. But I think for me, and maybe consulting also exacerbated this a little bit. You're always a couple steps in consulting or professional services, a couple steps away from the actual impact and being really deeply bought into what you're doing. And I missed that. I missed feeling deeply engaged and actually feeling like I was solving something myself. I was having a really, when you're working with a really big company, you're impacting something really small, even if it's an important project. And so I missed like just being able to drive things. And so I took a gamble at that point, actually even moving to Atlin, which was still pivoting from social cops into Atlin, figuring out what that business and company needs to look like. But I had discovered this about myself, that, when I feel like I have a lot of ownership, when I feel like I'm working on an important challenge that is exciting to me personally, that will bring out the best in me. And otherwise I tend to, like I said, get a little bit bored. And so I made that shift to Atlin, worked for a couple of years with the team on a lot of those core fundamentals, 0 to 1. It was a small go-to-market team. Who are we building for? How do we position it? What should the first pitch deck look like? And then again, Atlin started to take off. And a lot of those, every quarter I would otherwise have like, here's a challenge, figure it out. And that stops happening as much when you start to hit scale, at least for employees, not so much for founders. And so then I was like, do I want to take that next leap? Like, I feel like I've uncovered this about myself, where I'm driven a lot by this ownership, this excitement, these challenges. And the next obvious step was to be a founder myself. And so again, it was one of those calculated gambles where I was like, okay, let's try it. Let's see how it works out. And I do think it's panned out, touch wood. Like, I do really enjoy it. I think it's something that keeps me thriving and energetic. And it has its highs and it has its lows, but it's an incredible journey to be on.
Thanks. And one last question before I hand it to Sumit. So I've seen lots of founders build it abroad, right? You get better valuations, you get your better lifestyle. Was it just COVID that made you build it from India, or was it any particular reason?
So when you say build from India, you mean like build the actual core team and the like product?
No, like the founders being based in India. It becomes an Indian startup against, say, an American startup in some sense, right? And it actually plays out. It may sound stereotypical, but it actually plays out, right?
So I'm going to ask you a quick question on that also. Like, one of the things that I think maybe, like, to your point, COVID has exacerbated is like, what was happening to some degree anyways, like today, software is built for the world.
Correct. That's
You can focus and say, okay, I'm solving a problem for India, or I'm solving a problem for X geography. But if you're solving for like a team inside an organization, you're building for the world. And today you can actually build that sitting anywhere across the globe. And we're seeing that with how remote jobs are popping up, whether the startup is based in the States or in India. You have your Postmans as well of the world. And I think that's becoming more and more the case. Things are decentralizing. And so for us, yes, the market is global. And maybe the first market will be, the US is like that really big market to go after. But we've realized we can be sitting anywhere, and maybe we want teams across. And currently our team is based in India, but it also just gives you actually a really great advantage to be able to build here with a fairly high skilled market for software, and being able to distribute it in the highest demand, highest value market of the US.
No, I agree. B2B SaaS is India led. Teams are in India, but I'll take the perception question offline later. Sumit, over to you. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Govind, and thank you again, Shruti, and thanks, Kritika, for being on this call. So I think quite interesting session, Kritika, and I can relate a lot of things what you said about entrepreneurs, right? We wake up with a new battle every day at our hand, and we try to win that battle. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, and sometimes our shoulders are down. So in the last 3-4 months, if you could tell for the audience or for the people who are watching this, what has been your biggest, I would say, challenge and the biggest learning from the challenge? Because I think that's what I think is very critical, that how we overcome the challenge. Because entrepreneurs have to create that place. They have to, have a jugaad approach, have that approach of finding a small win and a small foot in the door kind of approach. So what has been one, if you could share some insight, it would be great for I'm sure it will help the budding entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I'll share actually a story that's not, and happy to go into other ones as well if you think other examples would be useful. But an example that was actually of just a hard time that we had in the early days of building Loop. Sometimes when storms hit, it's like the perfect storm. Everything goes wrong at the same time. And I thought it's not as much about, I guess, what we did as an innovative team to solve that, as much as I guess just the willpower of going through some really hard times, because you will have some really hard times, and the ability to just be with your team and build that even resilience to some degree. So in the early days of Loop, so like I said, we did a landing page test. We had folks sign up. We were building our MVP. We launched it. And right after that, when we launched it with our first set of early access customers, COVID hit for, all of North India in particular. Akash and I are both based here. And so within a matter of 7 days, Akash and I and both our families got COVID, and it was Delta. So it was pretty bad, to be honest. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's a kind of almost, it's not a happy story, right? I'm telling you something to actually pull the curtain back and say these things also happen, where we had just started launching for our early access customers, and we were a small team and we were just down. We just couldn't, work, and we were both sick. Our families were sick. There was a lot going on. And so in that point, we just almost had to grit our teeth and get through it. And our customers were obviously very, very understanding. But we did have issues and challenges even with them, because people can only be so understanding, right? At some point, if I'm putting in a support request and your team is not able to respond, how are you going to react as a customer? And so I think that was a really challenging time. And I'm maybe not saying this just to say we did some magical thing and we solved the problem, but it was for us actually just getting through that really tough period. And then at the end of it saying, okay, can we come back renewed from this? Can we continue and still be motivated? And also, can we take a learning for how we actually run this team and this company and build it? For us, I think actually the biggest learning was, frankly, nothing matters more than your physical, mental health and your family's well-being. And so that needs to be a core thing that we build into the culture of the company. We don't want to push anyone to a point where they are, struggling with those choices. That's not a happy place to be in. And so that was actually our learning and our takeaway for how we wanted to build the team going forward.
I think that's fantastic, Kritika. I think the summarizing in one line would be that you actually found a way of operating between two co-founders, how you guys operate and how you build a trickle down effect of the set of a culture. I think that's what COVID impact gave it to your team?
Yeah.
If I put it in a very simple way. My second question, because obviously you're in a tech space, what are you feeling about technology hiring? I hear from all startups in India right now that boss tech to mil hi nahi raha hai. Matlab tech is in fire, and I think the best time to be in from IIT is this time when you are getting. I regret that I did an MBA. I should go back to and write a JE again and maybe try my luck to get into IIT. The salaries, the level of roles open in India is crazy. Do you find similar challenges for your startup, right? And how do you attract talent for your company?
No, for sure. I think hiring is the biggest challenge. If you talk to any founder, you talk to any VC, like the number one request I think every VC gets is we need help with hiring. And the number one issue every founder is struggling with on every founder group is, hey, I'm hiring X. Can you please help me? I do think it's definitely a challenge. And I think there are actually some very interesting like ecosystem layers to this where, there's a skilling gap in India and all of those things that contribute to it. And so if anyone wants to solve that as a startup, I think that's a great opportunity. But I think for us, look, we've tried everything. We've tried like everything from, there are lots of like programs today that offer a, hire for you and all those things. I think maybe when you scale, some of those things can be valuable is to actually tap into those programs. But I think in the very, very early days, it's very founder-led, that process, because you really need people to buy into not just what the product is today, because that's going to change, like that will evolve very much, but have faith in your vision, have faith in you as people. And so that's again why some of these culture things are super important to us. We want people to have trust in who we are as human beings and that we care about them. And we, of course, they need to buy and care about the vision that we're building towards. I think those are your biggest your biggest weapons in this challenge. But I think tactically speaking, the number one thing that's worked really well for us, and this may or may not be a popular thing to say, but going to be honest again, in case it's really helpful for founders, is like as much as possible, go through networks of people, because that's where, you have somebody vouching for you on both sides saying, this is a person I believe in that you could work with as a founder, or, even as a hiree, I think this is somebody that might be a good fit for your team. And so there may be some kind of like almost, I actually don't know the exact mechanisms of why it works so much better. But there is something where maybe the person in between or the referees in between know the quality of the teams on both sides and are able to put you in touch with great people. And so that has actually worked best for us in the early days. It is not always scalable, and it's not, may not be the most popular answer, but just wanted to be honest about, what has worked for us.
So in single line, it's all about network for founders to get the right first set of people. So it's very important for them to come on platforms like Creator Products to find the right set of people.
Yeah, you can plug creators of products for sure. Definitely help.
So I'm doing some pitch for Shruti. So she said Sumit is doing some value for me, right? So I need to do that today.
No, thank you so much. We try and connect founders, but we try and stay away from the exact what the founder wants part. We want you to gauge that yourself. We try and get them upskilled if they want to, but other than that, it's purely between you and the person that you would want to talk to. I actually got a question from YouTube. So since you are transcripting and giving out notes is what the person says, what happens when this is not in English?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, actually goes back to that focus question. So I'm going to answer all these with the founder lens, but feel free to let me know if you'd want it to be more direct. But I think for us, we wanted to focus again, like how can we, and again, this was also learning from Atlan, right? You want to keep things as narrow as possible in the early days because you're resource constrained. And so you want to pick the best battle and really kill it at that, and then do things in addition. The worst thing you can do is do everything subpar. And so you want to do one thing, you want to do it really well. And so for us, the focus was focusing on, specific languages, specific use cases first. And so English is the number one language we support today. Over time, we will be adding more languages into the product, like local languages in India, European languages, all of those pieces, but we don't want to do that until we know we can do it really well. And so today we solve for English. And then over time, we'll be building in more languages as well.
Awesome. I got another one that says, thankfully it was COVID, and I don't know why this is thankfully. Thankfully it was COVID, but do you think this would have worked in a normal world?
You mean like the remote piece or?
The entire company, had it not been COVID, because now the number of online meetings have increased incredibly, which is why the product gets used in such a manner. So the question is that if had it not been for COVID.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't think it would have happened as quickly if it hadn't been for COVID. Because to your point, for the first time, you were moving to digital conversations very, very consistently. You suddenly, everyone is now on Zoom. So you have this infrastructure to have conversations that didn't exist before. Within that infrastructure, you have the ability to record these conversations as well very quickly. And so that becomes a data set that you're generating very fast that did not exist in the past. That, we were not all on Cisco and WebEx, like it was not happening. And so now you have this untapped data source. So even just thinking about it from the lens of like, again, Atlan was a data company, like Akash and I have that data filter as we think about a lot of these things and a lot of these questions. It is this unstructured data source. It is a huge volume of really valuable data that is now being generated that we don't have the systems and the infrastructure to make sense of, to be able to actually make valuable. And so in our view, we actually saw that this was a qualitative data source that's going to go through the same journey as quantitative data already has. And so, like data scientists spend 80% of the time cleaning their data. I was spending 80% of my time creating these Excel spreadsheets. And so we saw that same parallel. And yeah, I don't think it would have happened as quickly for sure if it hadn't been for that COVID shift to digital.
Mm-hmm. But I actually have a follow-up question on that. So
sorry, Shruti, I'm cutting you, but just one thing to add, Kritika, to Kritika's point. I think the user who asked this question, tell them to go and look at the stock of Zoom before COVID and post-COVID. That's a period answer. I think there's nothing else on this answer.
Yeah, I know. Actually, my question was around that. So even though this is a COVID-specific expedited use case, discovery got expedited, awareness got expedited. There are multiple channels that currently do video conferencing. Zoom does it, Google Meet does it. Anyone who uses Microsoft, the entire systems on Teams, you would probably have to integrate with each one of them, or you would have to integrate with a recording service that takes up from each one of them. Now, this is a very core and very important thing that is into the productivity angle of having a team meeting. What happens, and cut me off if you think this is like an incorrect question, what happens when someone like a Google, which has all the resources to build something like this, or a Zoom, which wants to take up the pie of the market with something like this? What happens when they end up making something like this, or they want to create something like this? Do you want to be the person that they look up to, hire us, or do you think you'd have to compete with them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's actually interesting because you're seeing some of these things, like you're seeing Zoom trying to figure some of this out actually live in the last couple of months and years. But so, if you think about what makes sense, so even for a company like Zoom or Google, I always go back to this focus thing. Focus does matter. So you're right that they might say, okay, I want to add, I have recording features and I want to expedite those or pieces like that. But frankly, that's why we have a very, very focused use case that's focused on not just, so today in the short run, what we're doing is we're like extracting this data from user calls for product and design teams. We're helping them say, okay, 80% of my users care about X, like let me build that intuition, alignment, let us get to, actual really good product decisions within days and not weeks or months. But that's not where we are stopping. Like our goal is really to solve that entire workflow, right? We also know that it's really hard for a lot of people to reach their customers. Can we actually make this entire process like a one-day cycle where you can say, oh, I have a new question that I need user input on. Can I click a button, have user calls set up tomorrow, test those, and get my insights and align my team? And then over time, actually, as you build those resources up, you actually have a database of incredible user insights that can be tied into your product analytics to say, okay, we see users are dropping off at this point. How can we actually bring in maybe support tickets? How can we bring in user research calls and say, okay, what is the triangulated answer here? They're dropping off because there's an issue with the button. What is the issue, or what are people not understanding, and go deeper through those user calls as well. And so I think it's really about that. Even if a Zoom goes into saying they are already recording calls to some degree, I don't see them like going into solving an entire workflow, just because for them also they'll focus on what is the most relevant part, and maybe they'll go into somewhat general meeting assistant type things. But we actually are building much more deeply. We're thinking about all these calls as actual data. So how do we help you work with that data? How do we actually unlock that data for you? Which is where we don't think a Google or a Zoom is actually going to go, or expand to that level of extraction or value.
That actually brings me to, who would you consider to be your competition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. There are definitely tools out there in the world that, I think there are general meeting assistants that do part of what we do, but we try to build more on top of that. But I think the biggest competitor, to be very honest, is always going to be like your status quo. It's always going to be like that Excel sheet that I was using before Loop. Like, how do we even allow people to discover that, Loop exists as an alternative to that? And like just that friction of like moving away. We are seeing good results with our early access customers, things like the shareability that Loop offers, where you can say, okay, like, you don't, maybe like, and this is just going back to some of the learnings and findings from our own work, but, you see teams having conversations about users and my opinion versus yours. And when you can put in a link and say, okay, here's the user expressing this point, it's way more powerful, and it just changes the kind of conversation you're having when you're actually able to bring data to it. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah. I actually, now have a founder related question. And this would sound kind of weird, but we don't usually see a lot of co-founders who are women. Have you noticed a shift in the way they are looked up to? Because for us as a community, any woman founder is like a role model, which is why we actually were looking forward to getting you back on any of our other programs after AUP. But from what we have had a lot of conversations, a lot of people have reached out, they see a bit of, or they experience a bit of biasness, not a discrimination, but biasness, because that paradigm is now changing a bit.
Yeah.
Do you face any of that? Did you think that, I am not the EA, I am the co-founder to that person? That's why I was the email.
That's a really good question. I definitely think I've faced those kinds of moments in my career in general. So I've been in meetings where, I set up the meeting for, our customers, and they were talking to somebody who's just onboarded on the team. And so they don't actually know how to answer the questions. And just because he's a guy. As a founder, I have to say, like, so it's also really hard to answer that question because I don't know the experience of a male founder. So I don't have that contrast to know for sure. But I personally haven't felt as much bias from a founder journey in particular. And maybe I've also just been lucky there not to disqualify anyone else's experience. But I will say I actually love being a female founder because I think that there's so much power in all just knowing and being connected to all the other female founders I know, and we're all so willing and happy to work with each other. I think that's generally true for the startup ecosystem. People go above and beyond to help each other. But I especially feel that with a lot of female founders. And, I will always want to be there again for any startup founder. But in particular, if I see a woman trying to enter a space which is historically very male dominated, just very few of us, I love seeing that, and I love to empower and support. And I think I feel a lot of that strength, and I feel a lot of that support. And I actually really appreciate that because I think it's much needed when there's such a just numbers like are just not in line with how they should be. And so I do see, even like for all the female founders out there, I think Ashwini Sokan recently tweeted something about this as well. We are all there to help and support every one of you. So if this is a journey you want to go down, I think maybe like I've seen a lot of female founders question themselves a little bit more. Like I definitely have, like, should I be doing this? Like being a little bit more like risk averse. And I would say take that plunge and reach out to other female founders. We are all there to help and support. And so like, even if you like cold message me, I'm happy to chat. And yeah, that's what I would say on the female founders piece.
Awesome. Actually, I had the good pleasure of mentoring a few people at Grad Capital's Entrepreneur Fund. You could see that the only plunge that they wanted to take was, if I do this, do I get support? And having founders who clearly call out that I would be there for you, help you out, mentor you out, or get you to connect with other VCs. That's all the support that I think any founder, any gender would want to have. Yeah. So and thanks a lot for that. Do you also feel that makes a difference at the investor table, or does that is that working for the company or against the company?
Yeah.
How does that make a difference at the table talking to an investor?
That is a good question also. I have heard of some stories where people have definitely felt like they needed to be much more prepared. They needed to be much like have many more things in order, etc., in order to be able to get that investor confidence. Again, I don't know if I've also just been fortunate to be like all the recent investor conversations we've had, I've actually really come across some incredible people in the ecosystem. So in my case, I don't feel like I have personally felt that level of maybe bias in those calls. But again, caveat that with I'm not a man, so I don't know. And also like, and yeah, and also not to discount, like I've definitely heard those stories. I have not personally experienced them.
Mm-hmm. I believe Govind is aching to ask a really interesting question.
My last question of the session, since time is running, Shruti. So, Kritika, I mean, this is public information, so I'm taking the liberty to ask you. So you were in the first batch of Sequoia Spark, which is actually $100,000 grant, right? From what I understand. Correct. So how did it means it's something amazing, right? You're getting Sequoia plus you're getting a grant plus the base is strong. So how did you apply for it? Yeah. How does it work? Any tips for founders out there who want to do the same?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, just to start off with, I think it's an incredible program for anyone who's interested. So you should definitely apply. It's a really cool set of female founders. You get also mentorship from other female founders who've further along in the journey. So for example, Ashwini is my founder mentor, and I absolutely love, like, I speak with her, every so often. We have recurring meetings, and she was incredibly helpful. Like from day one, she was like, how can I help you? These are the things I'm going to do. Like, just really powerhouse. And of course, you also get support from the Sequoia team and mentorship, etc., resources from them. So I first just wanted to start with that. It's a great program. You should definitely apply if you're considering it. In terms of any sort of advice for that application or that process, I mean, I think generally as a founder, you need to be aware of what your strengths are and you need to play to them. And one of the things that for me worked, I think, in that application process or journey in general was, I think, just telling the story. And this is important for all investor conversations, but telling your story in a way that, of course, translates well so people understand what you're saying, but also they see the passion, they see the problem, and they feel that you really care about solving this. I think those were the things that I think may have worked for me. You may have to also ask the Sequoia team for the inside scoop, but I think that's what the advice from my side would be, is to figure out what your strengths are. I think for me, it was a lot of, telling our story in a way and diving into or plugging into the passion for why we cared about this, what we really want to solve for, what is your vision, paint that picture. So that's what I would say, like a mix of figure out your strength and try to paint that picture using your strength as well.
Thanks. Shruti, Sumit, any further questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we're almost, I didn't even wait for the audience questions if there are any in chat. I don't see them, though. I saw them a few on YouTube. I didn't even see it was 55 minutes to the hour.
I hope
Okay.
it's a good sign.
It was, yes, I didn't realize it. When he said we are about to be over with time, that's when I first time checked it. Okay. All right. One quick question. So does having a Sikoa back you up help you get other investors? And this is coming from an absolute noob who knows nothing about getting investment, because a lot of the audience, when they think about making a company, they know they need investment. So
Yeah.
is it just contacts with VCs? Is it getting one good VC back you up and then moving from there? Is it going to everyone, selling off your equity? Because now everyone's Shark Tanked in the country, so everyone knows what this means. But there is a correct way around, and then there is you might get into a mess way around. So how does having being backed by Sikoa help?
No, I think it definitely does help. I think, like, for anyone who's again been through the founder journey, especially as a first time founder, that first bet somebody makes on you is the most important, because it gives some confidence to others as well in the ecosystem that, okay, there is something here, and it helps just validate what you're building. So I do think it does help. And I think always getting that first check is the hardest. And so one of the things that folks say is, like, optimize for your speed to getting that first yes, and then everything else in your round falls in place pretty quickly. In terms of general advice on fundraising or the thing, I think, again, the number one thing that Akash and I were very clear about, and it's kind of nice because we align pretty well on some of these values internally, is we wanted to make sure it wasn't just about the money, right? In this ecosystem, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of noise. We wanted to make sure we had good partners on board, and people we trusted, people we thought would enable and support us. In the early days, there's a lot that can change. There's a lot of challenges, a lot to be figured out. And so we wanted, a really good set of people, ideally who had done the journey with companies like us before. And so that's what we prioritized. Even over, like, pure valuation numbers and things like that. There's a lot of money out there in the ecosystem, but remember that this is somebody you're going to partner with, not just for like a week or two. It's somebody that's in the journey with you for years, possibly even a decade. And so you really want to think carefully about who you're bringing on board and what is your level of trust with them.
And then I also think that the kind of connections that they will open up for you, plus how much, and of course they bringing in money also means they want the profit of that money. So then how soon can you give that back in an absolute layman term? That I think would mean that you make that decision based on everything except than just I need money and I find take 30% of my equity.
Yeah.
All right. Is Loop now looking to expand to other geographies, or are you currently super focused on that one English-based market, which of course is the world runner language, but I'm guessing that you will want to expand in future once you establish the MVP and bring on a lot of people. So what does a roadmap for Loop look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're still in early access, but we've developed the product out significantly and actually iterating very closely with our customers. So again, taking from lessons from the past, we know that staying very, very close to your users in the early days is essential. And this is a phase where we have our hypotheses, we're testing them, we're testing with experiments, we're prototyping, we put those in front of our customers. So it's a very tightly knit ecosystem. And that is our focus. So we don't yet want to you don't want to grow. And I think I heard this in one of your previous episodes as well. You don't want to pump the accelerator before you know that the product is already in that really magical space. And so that's where we are. We're iterating rapidly, very closely with our customers, focused right now on that English language still. Over time, we will be bringing in other languages as well. But it's been, it's a really exciting journey. I think this is almost the best time to join a startup because you can shape so much. You can, like everything from what the product actually looks like, what is, our strategy for content, like all of that is up for grabs. And so it's a really fun time, at least for me personally, in building out Loop.
So you are looking to hire then?
Yes, always looking to hire if anyone wants to join. We have a couple of roles that are opening. So number one, we are looking for a senior front-end dev and a full stack dev. So if anyone's interested in that, reach out to Shruti or me, or we can sort of find ways to get you into that. And also starting to look at content folks as well. So anyone with those backgrounds, feel free to reach out. More than happy to have a chat and see if there's a good fit there.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Kritika. This was a really informative, we really look forward to looking at what Loop will do. And I'm sure one day I'm going to look at an TV ad and say, you know what? I know the founder for that. So really, really hoping it goes to like an international level where we end up being looking at it like a postman from this country. Really hope that happens. All the best to you. If your angels have a question or if they have something to add on, or if they want to have a call with her later on, let us know. This was an amazing session, Kritika. Thanks a lot. We're very, very happy to have you back. Always here for any of the services that we can provide you with, hiring, AUBing, doing this session again if you want, and anything and everything that we can help you with. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Govind. Thanks, Sumit. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Kritika. Thanks, Shruti.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Everyone, stay safe and
take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.